Well, hi again, folks. We're back again, and today we're going to make a 10-inch silicone sluice box mold. Now, this is for a silicone mat, similar to those that Alan Robertson's making, for those who know him. And this one is going to be for a Drop Riffle sluice, and it's going to be made out of very simple materials that you can buy locally here or make. And so I've been wanting a drop riffle mat for a long time, and now I have it. Thanks, Alan. Now this one's going to have a minor modification to fit my mat sluices. My slick plates on my sluices have a 1/4-inch square groove cut under the lip of them. That's so I can slide the mat up underneath them, and it will hold the mat in place while the water's running. Well, you can see here in the mold what it looks like. The 1/4-inch dowel is glued right up against the framework. Then the next dowel, which forms the trough, is glued right next to it. You'll notice that it's a little wider than 3/8. I cut these myself to make them a little wider. Well, to make one of these molds, you'll need some square dowels. Lowe's and Home Depot both carry these back in the molding departments. What we're going to use today is a 1/2-inch dowel for the framework, and then we'll use a 3/8-inch dowel to form the troughs in the mat. And a little 1/4-inch one is going to make just a little bump on there to go up under the sluice deck plate. Okay, here is the 1/2-inch for the frame, and also the 3/8 we're going to be using for the troughs. Now, as you can see, there's about 1/8 of an inch difference between the two of them. That is going to be the base of the mat that the troughs and the riffles are going to sit upon. Now, this is going to give you kind of a thin base, but it's also going to make the mat very flexible. Don't worry, it's plenty strong. Well, to start out with, we're going to need a baseboard that is a little bit bigger than the mat. Now, what I do is I take and cut up strips of cedar fencing and sand them smooth and glue them together. And this makes a very good, inexpensive base plate. The best glue I've found for this so far is this Titebond Type 3 glue. It's a waterproof glue, and it really works very well for these projects that need some waterproofing. These long clamps like this you can buy from your Harbor Freight store for about 10 bucks a piece, thereabouts. And I usually use about 3 of them. You'll want to put some pretty heavy pressure down on these boards while you're tightening them up. That makes it so they will lay flat across those clamps and keep your board straight. Double check them to make sure they're laying flat against that clamp surface. Okay, now we're going to start making the framework. I like to start at the top of the baseboard and put a 1/2-inch board across the top and screw it down. I like to use wood screws that are sunk down below the surface. That's because if I'm using a drawboard or something to try to level out the silicone when I'm making the mat, it won't catch on the heads of the screws. I have found it to be helpful to put a piece of 2x4 up under the board to kind of elevate it a little bit so that it makes it a little easier to put the clamps on. One thing I've learned to do is to use about a 1/4 inch board across the one side and use that for a straight edge so you have something to butt these dowels up against to keep them even along that one end. Now, the problem I've had in the past is that sometimes glue will leak out from around the dowel and end up gluing this board down. So what I do is I put a piece of masking tape around it so that if the glue leaks out and glues to something, it'll be to this tape, and that way it can be easily removed. I always like to take a square and keep checking off and on, make sure everything is squared up the way it should be. Now, if you're got a square sluice, you want a good square mat to fit in it and not something that goes off on different angles. Well, now I need to cut the excess off from the baseboard. And so we're just kind of measuring to see what the outer edge of the board's going to be like. And we're going to trim it down to size now. Oops, blade's not quite high enough, so give it a little more elevation. Okay, that's looking pretty good now. So now we're going to start gluing the dowels down. Okay, I like to put a couple of chunks of 2x4 under the ends to elevate it so it makes it easier to clamp. Okay, first of all, goes down is a little 1/4 inch piece that makes a little nubbin on the end of the mat. Well, I have taken and made 2 spacers to ensure that the spacing between these dowels is going to be exactly a 1/2 inch apart, and they're all going to be even. Also, you'll notice here that these dowels that I'm putting down are wider than what you would buy at the store. I made these myself, and so I'm going to make them 3/4 of an inch wide so that I'll have a wider trough at the head of the sluice. Actually, I'm going to put in 3 or 4 of these to handle the bulk of the material that comes down the slick plate and ensure that it will keep all the gold right there in that top riffle. Now, if you want something that's a little wider, like I'm doing here, you can also glue 2 of those 3/8 inch dowels together to make a 3/4 inch. Oops, forgot. This one has to go up flush against that little quarter round there. Well, my first mistake. One of many, I'm sure. Always double check to make sure that the dowels are flush up against that blue bar back there. I've had them slip out on me when I put the clamps on and stick out on the other end a little further, and then you have to try and trim them down on one end and you have a hole on the other end. After you put the clamps on, you always want to double check. Make sure that the dowel is butted up against the blue bar and that you have your spacing right between the dowels, and also check about every other one to make sure that you're still keeping everything square. Yeah, this is very repetitive over and over and over again, so kind of on the boring side here. So I think what we'll do is we'll skip ahead a little bit on it. Well, we finally got them all laid out and glued down, and so now it's time to put the side border on and screw it down. Okay, now it's time to put the bottom bar on. Now, when I do this, I like to put the spacing between it and the other dowel about half of what it was on the rest of it. That makes it so that if I decide to glue two mats together, I can glue that little bar together with the other one, and they'll make just one full-size one. Now we'll just measure and cut the final side and get it screwed down as well. And there you go. One finished mold ready to start laying silicone. Now's the time for the finish. I usually like to give it about 4 good coats of spar varnish to make sure it's good and waterproof. And so we're going to apply that here and we'll be done. Well, this is getting a little bit on the long side, so I think what I'll do is I'll save the filling of the mold till a little later and do another video on it here. So in the meantime, here's just a small sampling of some of the molds and mats that I've made in the last little while. And I've really enjoyed this, and I want to thank Alan Robertson for coming up with this idea. Many thanks, Alan. So anyway, as always, thank you so very much for stopping by and watching, and I hope you have a great day. Bye now.